Started, and I want to thank everybody for joining. And just a couple of rules is that this event is being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. So if for any reason you should have to leave or have to join, or you have friends joining later, they can always catch up. And so thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to now introduce Dr. Francie Taylor, Francie, who is the director for the American Indian Resource Center, who is going to go ahead and welcome us and say a little bit for us. And so, Francie, I'd like to hand it off to you.
Thank you. Halito, Chimapcha. My name is Francie Taylor, or my real name is Kasawasat Kito Bahasa Kisquayo. I'm the director of the American Indian Resource Center. I'm Choctaw and Cheyenne, and I'm very thankful for being here today. So I want to thank you very much for allowing me to join you today and give an opening to this very important subject and panel. It's extremely gratifying to be in the company of such esteemed colleagues, panelists, and the moderator. I especially want to acknowledge the thanks that I always give to the profoundly important work that Annie does. She brings together all of us to be able to share in a venue like this. And we're really blessed to have Annie in our community and taking the lead on this. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that everyone, and I understand that there's a number of people coming into this meeting from other areas than just around Salt Lake. And so I want to acknowledge that every person stands on Indigenous land. All of this land at one time in North America was the sacred homeland of Indigenous people. We're still here. No matter where you live, you're on Indigenous land that was cherished, protected, treasured, and considered a relative by the first people that were here. Many of the names that we have in our own languages mean we are the people of, and we show that that relationship, that this land is our blood, it is our soul, it is who we are. We acknowledge that the Great Basin, where the University of Utah sits, is and has been, continues to be the Aboriginal homeland of the Nunchi Shoshone-speaking people, the Shoshone, the Paiutes, the Goyutes, and the Utes, or Goshutes and the Utes. If you go farther south, it's the homeland of the Navajo or the Diné people and all of their relatives and the Puebloan people. This is still and always has been Indigenous land. That many people don't recognize this, that don't accept the fact that we've always been here and we're still here, is an extremely insidious ongoing system of colonization that we need to break. Many of the problems we have with the violence against women in our communities can be traced back to this being separated from and isolated from our lands. These are troubling times in many ways. Many of our people, children especially, have triggers in October and November. These are rough times for us when we have to deal with events and holidays that are fictitious at best, such as Columbus Day, Halloween, and what people think of as the first Thanksgiving. We could get into the history of it, but it's not what is represented in our education systems. So today it's important or imperative that we stand together to eliminate these misconceptions and the historic trauma that continues to impact our communities. It's my hope and belief that with the wisdom of our leaders, we can engage in a greater dialogue and understanding between all of us to a greater good. I grew up being reminded constantly of the responsibility as a matriarch, as a woman in my community, to be one of the seventh generation. The wisdom that I may have, that tiny bit of wisdom I may possess, is totally a gift from my ancestors. I claim none of it as my own. I do not claim to possess this because it's my responsibility and obligation to hold this knowledge briefly to pass on to those descendants that I may have and their descendants on into that seventh generation. These are difficult times. We have to remember the sacred responsibilities that we've been given as women in our communities and citizens. My auntie often says, speak softly but carry a big stick. We're entering a time where we must begin to utilize that big stick and stop the trauma, the historic trauma and the continuing trauma that impacts our communities. We must build a better future through knowledge for our children and their children and the community at large. Folks, we're all in this together, and if we want to create a better world, we have to work at it together. Omesh ipasai necha hakanat. Thank you. It's been a privilege to be here, and I want to turn it over now to this exceptionally fine panel and moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. We'd like to now introduce Dr. Dena Ned, who is a professor in social work at the University of Utah.
Thank you, Annie. And Francie Yakoki, thank you for that wonderful opening for an amazing afternoon that we have planned for all of you. And it is it's my great honor to be able to be in this role as moderator today. And just to make certain you all are in the right place, you are attending this afternoon's panel presentation on reclaiming our values and visibility in Indian country, Native Americans addressing intimate partner violence. My name is Dena Ned. As you have heard, I am a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation and your moderator. So today I'm going to introduce in order of our panelists today. And then if you will hold your questions until the end of the three presentations, and we will have significant time to have that discussion. For all of our attendees, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom page. You can enter questions in there, and myself and Annie will keep an eye out for those questions and ask them of our panel at the end of their presentations. So if that's okay with the panelists, I'm going to go ahead with your introductions. And it is, again, my honor to introduce, beginning with our first panelist, Wendy Slater. Wendy is the vice chairwoman of her tribe, La Jolla Band of Luiseno Indians. And in her third term as an elected tribal leader, Wendy also serves as program director of La Jolla's Avellaka, yes, program addressing safety for Native women on her reservation. One of Wendy's passions is to assert and utilize tribal sovereignty to bring much needed services to her people. Wendy is also a member of the San Diego County Sexual Assault Response Team Committee and a tribal subcommittee member of the Violence Against Women Act Committee. Wendy is a founding board member of a nonprofit tribal coalition, the Strong-Hearted Native Women's Coalition, and the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, which is a national tribal nonprofit dedicated to restoring tribal sovereignty to increase our Native women's safety. Throughout her career, she has advocated for Native LGBTQ and Two-Spirit youth and adults, tribal youth, health, education, land, environmental issues, and safety. She's been developing innovative ways to create tribal responses and programs respective of her people's customs and traditions. And I welcome Vice Chairman Schlater. Thank you, Wendy. Our second panelist today, this afternoon, is Dr. Leece Lee Oliver. Dr. Lee Oliver is Blackfeet and Choctaw and is an assistant professor and director of American Indian Studies at Fresno State University. Her research and teaching centralized questions about Indigenous and third world phenomenology with attention to social movements that engage decolonial political strategies, their key figures, scholars, and teachers. Leece's book manuscript, Red Feminist Roots, American Indian Women, Coloniality, and the Liturgies of Death and Life, focuses on the phenomenon of American Indian women's racialization as a trajectory that reflects the long shadow of colonial racism and heteronormativity. that leave American Indian women and girls vulnerable to an epidemic rate of violence today. I should also note that this book does pay homage to American Indian women leaders whose legacies of resistance embrace cultural traditions in order to promote and protect American Indian lifeways historically and today. We welcome Dr. Leece Lee Oliver. And our third panelist this afternoon will be with Moroni Benally. Moroni is Diné and is currently the coordinator for public policy and advocacy at Restoring Ancestral Winds, Inc. in Salt Lake City. He also serves as a board member of Western Resources Advocates, a conservation organization that seeks to protect the West's land, air, and water to ensure that vibrant communities exist in balance with nature. In his recent past, Moroni also served as director of Navajo Nation's Division of Natural Resources, where he helped facilitate the Navajo Nation's involvement in the Bears Ears National Monument and worked extensively on natural resource policy at the tribal, state, and federal levels. Moroni is also, I should add, a co-founder of the Utah League of Native American Voters, where he has assisted and advocated on behalf of tribes for public lands, water, voting rights, and violence prevention. He is currently finishing a PhD in public policy at the University of Washington, where he's focusing on collaborative governance around natural resources. And we welcome you, Moroni Benally. And with those introductions, I'd like to turn the time over now to our first presenter, Wendy Slater.
Thank you, Dr. Ned, for that that heartfelt welcoming. Welcome, everybody. Mio and Polov Temet. Good day. Hello and good day. I'm the program director for the Avellaka program. Our main mission tagline statement is in the footsteps of our mothers, safety for Native women. And so I want to put a disclaimer out there too, like just because you say you see in the footsteps of our mothers, safety for Native women, doesn't mean that we leave the men out, right? So we have a tribal belief that if you give the woman everything that she needs to take care of herself, her home, her children, she will in return take care of the whole village. And so that's one of the stronghold value systems that we have created our Avellaka program throughout the 10 years that we've been here on our reservation doing the work. And so I always like to start my presentations off by a quote from Tilly Blackbear. Tilly Blackbear was a Lakota elder from the Rosebud Nation. And she also shared one of her teachings with us from White Buffalo Calf Women, which is, it is our belief that we are spirits on a human journey. And that way, every step we take in our human life is a spiritual act. Every word we speak is a conversation with Creator. And you know, it exemplifies Tilly's walk with us. Tilly's the grandmother of our movement in violence against women. She was the first Native woman to go nationally in the 70s to Congress and advocate for us. And this is Tilly here in one of our flyers celebrating our 10 years. So last year was our 10th year of existence, of our resistance, and here on the La Jolla Indian Reservation. And so this is Tilly with our first sexual assault awareness walk with our nation's flags behind her, ready to start us off. One of the things that Tilly also that she also shared with us was to be a good relative, and to be a good relative was to walk in a certain sacredness, right? And looking at this picture and remembering Tilly in this moment, this walk would have never happened without her, because when we were first starting our work here on the reservation, a lot of our women were fearful of coming together and really supporting and the creation of a program like this because of the backlash that they thought that they would have gotten from the men in the community at that time. And mind you, in 2009, we were still waiting 9 to 12 hours for a response when a woman had called in a domestic violence call. And sometimes that response didn't happen until even the next day. And so when I was sharing the story with Tilly, I remember her, she just looked across the dining room table from me, and she's all like, you know, organize your women and let them know that I'll be there. And that's proof that Tilly, you know, kept her word and came to support our community. And we've just been thriving and flourishing ever since, creating that safe space for the women to reclaim their sacredness back in our community. So this is, Avellaka's work is directed by the Native Women's Advisory Committee. We also have men that sit on this advisory committee. And the work that Avellaka does is so impactful because everything that we've created has come from community. The direction, identifying the gaps within our community and reconnecting back to our tribal value systems has really created a safe space for elders to come and share some of their knowledge with us to expand on our work. And so this is their mission statement, and I think it's important to share because everything that I share with you today, except for the colonialism examples, are going to be part of our tribal value systems, right? And so the committee's mission statement affirms their commitment to healing, safety, respect, education awareness, strengthening our spirituality, supporting our families, teaching honor, loyalty, and forgiveness. Their role is to advise the Avellaka program through the development and implementation of services to ensure that the program meets the needs of the community. And that's very important, right? To meet the needs of the community so that your program, your space that you're creating is welcoming. Like, we don't use the word client at the Avellaka program because we don't believe we have clients. We have relatives that walk through our door. And there's no difference between them and us that are working in the office to offer those resources, because that could be us walking through the door one day too, right? And so, you know, we greet everybody who walks through our door as our relatives. And so as Dr. Ned had mentioned earlier, I also sit on the board for the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center and a founding board member of that national organization. And through this, I just wanted to share from the roots on up is examples of the impacts of colonialism that our people have experienced, right? And then the beautiful side of the tree is everything that is life affirming prior to colonialism. And that's where we're always striving to get back to in the reclamation of our language and our teachings and our customs and traditions, and not just reading about them, but really practicing them, living them, being mindful of them, right? It's a work in progress. Nobody's perfect, but you know, it doesn't hurt to try to live up to that standard. Here's a quote from Gunchi Cook. She's an elder from Akwanaski Mohawk Nation up by in New York State. It says, "The women are the first environment. We are privileged to be the doorway to life. At the breast of women, the generations are nourished and sustained. From the bodies of women flow the relationship of the generations, both to society and to the natural world. In this way is Earth our mother," the old people said. "In this way, we as women are Earth." And that's very beautiful because that goes back to our people's teaching back here. And so when I run across quotes like this and women across the nation, it just re-fortifies our First Nations peoples values in life-affirming ways. And it's not like we didn't have acts of violence. We had them in our community, but they were dealt with very harshly. And so if a woman were to get sexually assaulted, or a child, or another man, those types of violences were either dealt with by death, banishment, or being in service to that family for the rest of their life, right? So those were like harsh consequences. And so here's some more example of some of the work that we did with NIWRC through the Strong Families Respect One Another initiative. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I wanted to focus on the bottom part of it. So it's, we all give in many ways: women, men, two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. By supporting each other through the hard times, sharing food or time together, and taking on cultural responsibilities like knowing or participating in ceremonies. When we respect each other's roles and honor each other's life-supporting power, we create stronger communities. Stronger communities mean pulling together and never leaving anyone behind, especially when they are healing from domestic violence or sexual assault. And this is true for us here at the Avellaka program, the work that we do at NIWRC, a lot of the tribal programming that is happening across Turtle Island. You just see the value systems and the cultural teachings that are strengthening and fortifying these types of actions. And I just wanted to also share with you that October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I know we're talking about IPV, and some people have a question of did it change from domestic violence or IPV? Well, the history between domestic violence was, it started out with people who were married, right? Who are in married relationships. And IPV is a new term that expands upon that. So you don't have to necessarily be married to be intimate with a person, your partner. So IPV kind of like encompasses and includes everybody, the two-spirit people as well as the straight people too. So getting into colonialism, these were our first colonizers, the Spaniards. And so when you talk about IPV, you can't talk about IPV without talking about gender side, right? So I just wanted to share some of Deborah Miranda's definition from her article, Extermination of the Hoyas. So gender side is an act of violence committed against victims' primary gender identity. And for me, in my people's language, like for myself, I identify as Hawaii Patoha, and that's a third gender for us. And so, which means someone who walks in both the feminine and masculine in multiple dimensions. And because I only have 15 minutes, I'm not able to expand on that. Hey. but feel free to reach out to me later. Hey. So I wanted to share with you some of our work that we've done through our Decolonize Love project here in 2018. So I'm going to show you a couple of clips here and give you an example of how some of our cultural work has tied into creating safe space for our Waipataha LGBTQ people.
For coming, my name's Dan Rodriguez. I'm going to be talking a little bit about our creation story, and I'm going to be talking about our traditions. We have the dual creators, Yokomatis and Tuchapa, and they came from a different place that was different than this world here. When it came time to make the universe, they said, we need light. So one made light, grabbed mud, nimshat, white dirt, white clay, spit into it, blew into it, and it started to glow. And it became Heshla, became the moon. They said, well, we need another one. So the other one grabbed yellow clay, rolled it up, blew into it and started to glow brightly, held it and flicked it into the sky, and it became Enya, the sun. Now Heshla is the moon, Enya is the sun. This is how we say people who are gay, we say Ipashla or Cha'akashla, because they have the power of the moon. And when we talk about the power of the moon, this power is a power Shumap or Humup. It's the power of dreams. And someone who has this power of the moon is very strong in the dreams. They come, they said, we need light. So one made light.
Oops. Sorry. So that was one clip. That's an example from the Kumeyaay creation story. And then I just wanted to share one more clip with you before we wrap up, or I wrap up.
We as elders are representing the root of our tribe. The homophobia didn't come until Christianity came. Prior to Christianity, we were all one, we were all family. We need to get back to our original ways. It is not okay to dislike somebody based on their sexual preference. It's private, it's personal, and people should mind their own business.
I'm just so proud to be a part of this. I see people that are my color, people that are wearing feathers, people that are representing their tribe, and it's awesome. And I hope to see a lot more people across the country doing the same.
Where we marched in the parade is traditionally Kumeyaay territory. So to be able to be at the parade in San Diego and to have all of our tribal flags represented was a very powerful statement. We went and asked the tribal governments for their permission to be representative in the parade and to take a stand with us to end the injustices, the invisibility of our people on our homelands. And that's such a beautiful thing because it's validating that we deserve justice and that our place amongst our people still exists. We just have to come back and reclaim it. Yeah, so that was some of the work that we've done with our Rainbow of Truth Circle here at the Avellaka program. But in closing, I want to say thank you, everybody. And I wanted to highlight some of the other programs that we do here at Avellaka as well to address IPV. We have our Yowayiwish Girls Group, our Tukwut Boys Group, our Elders Gems, and also our Rainbow of Truth Circle. And for more information, I encourage you to look us up on the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center, and look there for more resources. We've also collected various creation stories from all over Turtle Island, including the Hawaiian Islands, in regards to extracting the value systems to create safe space for LGBTQ Two-Spirit folks. So thank you everybody. And I'm gonna go ahead and turn it back over to you, Dr. Ned.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I can't wait for the questions from our audience at the end of all of our presentations today. And that's a reminder as Dr. Lee Oliver prepares for her presentation. We're going to switch over from Wendy to Leece. I want to remind our attendees that at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A and a chat function. If you have questions as they arise, if you would just put those in there, and we will we'll ask them for you on your behalf at the end of our third panelist. So with that, Dr. Leece Lee Oliver, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. All right, let me make sure I have my volume up. It's been a little issue for me. Okay, Nexakoa, everyone. My name is Leece Oliver. I want to say thank you so much and hello to all the relatives out here. I'm Blackfeet and Choctaw and privileged to be a part of this conversation, and just so fortunate and love the fact that I get to do this work with my life. I want to also extend my gratitude to all of my teachers in all these years, the Lakota, the Cheyenne, and the Nez Perce elders and teachers who've carried me along and helped me really stay grounded and understand, how to live through all of this world we all share. And do meaningful work. So I'm very appreciative. In fact, the Cheyenne elder, after sharing some stories with me, signed me up for this wonderful organization that Wendy founded and runs, which is the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. And through that, I highly recommend too, looking into their work and their webinars and teachings. And I've gotten to join in conversations with the Department of Justice and talk about the things I'm going to share with you today. Wendy, I also really appreciate the work that you all do there and the voice that you give us. Part of the talk we're doing today has to do with invisibility and visibility. And one of the messages I think that really came through as I was putting my slides together, which I will put up on the screen now, is how much of this work is done by communities for communities. And it's impressive what people do because they have a love of their people. So I titled my talk, Honoring American Indian Women, Girls, and Peoples, and that'll tie a bit into how we conceptualize what Luana Ross calls personal sovereignty. So words are going to be a big part of what I'm sharing today because words matter, especially when they become put together to form laws. So my hope is today that I'll share a kind of patchwork quilt because I'll try to move myself and keep an eye on a clock at the same time and share what I can about what I've learned to understand how what we call anti-Indianism, bias against Native Americans, is steeped in racialization and gender bias, and how that becomes rooted in the laws that govern our lives. So here's a couple of the goals that I have, and I was thinking that for some folks it might just help to understand where I'm coming from. There's a lot of information. So one way that my work really, and my life and my community organizing is rooted in, I would say, like, why do I do this work? What is it? Where am I coming from? It's because for a very long time in my life, I've needed to understand the roots of violence, the roots of racism and subjectivities and sexism and all of that since I was a kid. So an odd duck for sure. But these things, I needed to make sense of the world I lived in. So when I got older, I realized and learned and from some great teachers that colonialism mattered and that today colonial ideology is still with us. And with Nelson Maldonado Torres, who's a wonderful decolonial scholar in the world, when I was going to school, he in his classes would talk about this turn, this philosophical turn in the world that colonialism caused, that changed how people conceptualized other human beings and trees and animals. And how colonialism in a nutshell can really represent a time that everybody and everything gets marked as a resource and a type of property and something that's sellable and ownable. And I started to think about what I knew about violence against women and children and people of color as I saw growing up and as I came to understand was prevalent. I started to think about how did all of that change what human rights and human conditions were, right? because I also noticed that there was negligence and neglect, and there seemed to be a sort of legalization of violence, even if it was expressed through a type of negligence, right? So I wondered then, how do colonial laws help to institute this notion that humans aren't of equal value, and what that meant for the term that shows up in law a lot, which is Indian country. So some of the terms I'm going to talk about today, we use in a positive way in our work and in our communities. We have a love for Indian country, and the law, on the contrary, federal Indian law does not use with such love. So this is what I want to think about today, and how all this comes to boil down to leaving Native American women, girls, gender nonconforming people. I would use that broad of a way of framing it. Transgender, sexuality seems to be an obsession in this country. All of these things seem to matter in the law. And so to the right of the screen, I share this picture. I love this picture so much. It's by Sylvia P. The title is "In Honor of All the Native Women Who Just Vanished and Yet No One Did a Thing." And this speaks to the heart of why so many of us speak out on this. This is a traditional style woman's dress, and instead of elk teeth across her dress, she has pictures of missing and murdered Native American women. So it's just an important emblem. So one of the things I really think a lot about is how words get power. And in laws, it's words that get knitted together in stories and logics of human difference, and are used then to define and redefine, to define what means rights, to articulate what are consequences for failing to live within a certain set of rights. And I wonder how people get defined and redefined. How is Indian country defined in the law? When and where did the term Indian, squaw, brave, savage, hostile show up? These words show up in very particular ways in colonial laws. In this period of time, in the 1550s, and this, of course, there's dates before this, there's major moments after, but this debate that happens in Spain is really important because Spain, France, England, the Dutch, German, Portuguese, they were all sending ships of people out. They called explorers, and they were bringing people and materials back to crowns and making them wealthier and more powerful. And at some point, Spain realized that they were allowing for the enslavement of people to work on behalf of the crown. And these were indigenous people in the Americas. And Spain realized that if it was going to carry on enslaving people and using violence to subject people to its power, it had to make it legal. Let that soak in for a second. So everything that they articulated that they could do, they wanted to justify. So they carried out this debate that Lewis Hanks says is probably, there's a quote here on the page, "For the first time and probably for the last, a colonizing nation organized a formal inquiry into the justice of the methods used to extend its empire. For the first time, too, in the modern world, we see an attempt to stigmatize an entire race as inferior, as born slaves according to the theory elaborated centuries before by Aristotle, who had claimed, quote, some beings are inferior by nature, and it's only just and natural that prudent and wise men have dominion over them for their own welfare as well as for the service of their superiors," end quote. So those kinds of quotes really stick out to me. And I wonder, when you articulated that into law, is that not what happens, right? And so you see in that debate in Spain in 1550 that there's actually this case made by a religious figure, Bartolomé de las Casas, who argues, no, the quote unquote Indians, they're prudent and they're rational and they're as good as we are. The problem with them is that they're not Christian, right? And Sepulveda argues, no, they're just all bad. He says, quote, Indians are as inferior as children are to adults, as women are to men. Indians are as different from Spaniards as cruel people are from mild people, as monkeys are from men, end quote. So when you take a look though at this same history through Native oral traditions, which is represented on the page here, the true story of Pocahontas is written by descendants of the actual person named, nicknamed after her mother, Pocahontas, you find that a very different story is told. And what happens here is you have two conflicting stories. One is with the US's historical record of its own history, and the other is with the modern TV and media productions, Hollywood productions of that history. Right? And as they say, and as it shows on this page here, you have not read this story before. This is the first written history of Pocahontas by her own people. It is vastly different from the history you have been taught from school, novels, and movies. And so what we find is there's all of this storytelling happening in this book. They actually took a section of years out of their oral history and they published it and translated it. This came out in 2007 after Disney was going to put out yet another version, a celebration, a 20-year celebration of Pocahontas the cartoon. And it's just such a horrendously, awfully, false story that they tried to work with Disney and correct the story, and Disney wasn't going to have it. So they put their own book out. They said, we will tell our story. And so these are some of the things that they shared that I thought was really important, because the same logic that the English had, that the Spanish had, right? Indians are cruel, they're like monkeys, right? Men and women, it didn't matter. There's no chivalry towards women. The same thing was what the Powhatan were experiencing with the English, right? As they said in their own history, they wanted to look at the Powhatan people as savages, right? But the Powhatan logic was, in the middle of the page, people do not just kill other people without some kind of justification for their conscience, right? Unless they are simply killers and murderers. The English were looking for ways to take, enslave, and kill. That was the experience. This is a carving that's supposed to be like Pocahontas, and the reason that I choose it is because it is at the very least most accurate around her age. So I highly recommend, if you can stomach it, watching the cartoon. This goes to show that deep back in this time, it was quite common to rape children, women, it didn't matter. There's something in that colonial ideology that allows for that. Pocahontas herself was trafficked. That's the real story, right? The Powhatan people have continued to try to get her remains brought home. She was buried in a place called Gravesend, overseas, near the place she was in England, where she did not live as a diplomat and enjoy a life of luxury with the Queen. It's all in the book, so I'll leave it at that. What we know is that people had different ways of living here, right? Women, men, boys, girls, elders, third genders. There were tribes that had multiple, 4 genders, 7 genders, right? Spectrums. You could change throughout your life, right? Your name might change, your gender might change, who you partner with might change. This kind of adaptability to life and nature was quite okay, right? These are some of the figures that are usually represented to talk about gender in Native American societies. You have woman chief of the in Lausanne, and you have Wewa, and you have Ashtesh. These people are not on this page to have a discussion about sexuality. There's such an obsession to simplify people into who they're intimate with. In fact, these are people with very lauded and well-respected contributions to their people, right? These are some of the Blackfeet women whose name Strong-Hearted Women, Strong-Hearted Society, as it was translated, was also translated into Manly-Hearted by anthropologists, and eventually that kind of disappears in the history. There's something about not having a binary gender performance that really bothers colonial simplification of human expression. So these are some of the more a generational representation of Native women who are Blackfeet, and part of recognized as strong-hearted women. This is one of the chiefs in California still fighting for federal recognition of her people, carrying on her ways, teaching, working hard, spending the better part of her adult life so far. Chief Kayleen Sisk, fighting for the recognition, right, of the Winnemem-Wintu up in the Shasta area, and bringing, sort of mentoring the new chief coming along, this young woman. But violence has been such a long, storied part, right? The sacred way of respecting human to human, respecting our relationship to place, is really absent in the colonial record. You have women of all red nations, right? You have these generations, like the MMIW, for some of those of you who are younger, maybe not young, but just sort of coming into realizing or learning that there's been an epidemic rate of violence against Native American women and girls, and against people who are gender non-conforming in the colonial sense. Women have been coming to the table to fight this for generations. The Tribal Law and Order Act was put in place in 2010, partly because all of these statistics came to bear, and President Barack Obama said, is it not the requirement of a nation to protect all of its people, right? That was one of the things that motivated him to sign the Tribal Law and Order Act. And we know that Native women face and girls face a 10 times higher rate of violence in their lifetime. 86% of that violence committed by non-Native Americans. The Violence Against Women Act was supposed to take measures against that, but until 2013, it could not, legislators couldn't figure out how to incorporate Native women because they said jurisdictional messiness got in the way. We heard about the Honorable Tilly Blackbear, who is sort of the founder, right, the history, right? But we today also have the Sovereign Bodies Institute, and sorry, covered her name up with the logo from Sovereign Bodies, sorry, but Anita Casey. This is a graduate student. I want to just impress on all of you, you know, going to school, keep at it, and look at what she did, right? She took it upon herself to use her knowledge in creating software to create a tracking system that goes from 1900 to today, tracking missing and murdered Native American women. One of the things that happens is when you report somebody missing in a Native community, the typical police time is supposed to be, you start searching in 24 hours. In Native communities, the average is 5 days. Nobody even starts looking for 5 days. There's a lot of different terms that we need to sort of come to terms with. Intimate partner violence in our own communities allows us to recognize all sorts of partnerships and loving partnerships. In the law, it recognizes that somebody who preys and sexually traffics is called a pimp. And when they have prostitutes, the law considers that an intimate partner relationship. That totally puts the person being pimped out, so to speak, in an incredibly vulnerable position. We need to get back to a place where sovereignty, bodily sovereignty, personal and tribal sovereignty matter. This is some of the work that women have also done. Right? This is Rebecca Belmore and her work. Each of these names is a missing and murdered person. She cleaned a street and did up an art exhibit and lit candles for all these people who had gone missing. The red dress is recognized in her artwork as standing up for women who are missing and murdered. So I will leave it there, except to say that silence does matter. And I really appreciate this time to talk and share with all of you. Thank you so much. I will.
Thank you. With that, our last speaker, third panelist today is Moroni Benally, and I will turn the time over to you now.
Thank you, Dena, and thank you to all the other panelists who I've learned quite a bit today. My name is Moroni Benally. Nashashin Shlindo, but Ani Bashish Chindo, Tuahane Dash Chedo, Habahe Dashanala, Akut Aldenen Shlin. I'm Navajo, and I work for Restoring Ancestral Winds as the coordinator of public policy and advocacy. And a lot of the work that our work focuses exclusively among the tribes in the Great Basin area, so we cover quite a bit of a region. And so what I want to do is just sort of, just quickly tell, we're one of 18 tribal coalitions funded throughout the country to work specifically on issues around domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, stalking, dating, and family violence. And so one of the first things is there was a conversation earlier. The chairwoman talked about the difference between IPV and DV, and there's arguments going on in the academic community about what precisely is the distinction between the two terms. But what I'm going to use is basically generally accepted from the CDC, and then we'll just sort of go with that. So intimate personal violence is usually about someone that has intimacy, that shares some sort of romantic, close relationship with, and often comes specifically in physical, sexual violence, stalking, or some form of psychological aggression. Oftentimes, intimate partners use these tools more so than other types of violent individuals. And so we'll just take a quick look at prevalence in Indian country. Just a quick disclaimer on the data. What data here is may be incorrect and is imperfect, but at this point, this is the best imperfect data that is available for us to get a sense of how violence operates within Indigenous communities. And so one of the first ones that we're looking at is the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey from 2010-2012. And basically what they're saying is what we've already pointed out. They found empirical evidence to suggest that Native American women and men are disproportionately impacted by IPV. And then if we take a look at just some statistics here, overview in Indian country, we could take a look at just the difference between the male and females, and what male and females and what they've experienced. You can just look at that. There's a lot to talk about in all of this. And here's another one about specific events that happened to them. And then we take a look at specifically physical violence. We find out 55% of Native women, 43% Native men experience some form of physical violence. And of those, 55% of the violent homicide of Native women is related to IPV, intimate partner violence. And so we just take a look at more statistics. I'm going to go through these really quickly, and so you can just see the different types of violence that happened in these communities or within these specific demographics. And you can take a look at here on this section here who the perpetrators are. And what we're finding is that the large percent of the perpetrators of interracial violence are white perpetrators. Excuse me. And so we take a look at the Indigenous community, and we see a few things here, just in terms of what they're experiencing. This study only had 24 people that had reported homicide. And so anyway, so what we're looking at here is there's just a disproportionate amount of violence. I'm not going to go through and talk about all of this, but we take a look here in Utah, Native young people, almost 7% of them in high school experience some sort of violence. We take a look at sexual violence again, the difference here, Native American between men and women, and their comparisons to white men and women. And you can just see that there's this variation, and a lot of it, of that violence is disproportionately experienced by Native people. Again, this Indigenous queer, two-spirit, LGBTQI. You can take a look at how vastly different each of these numbers are, but this first one is this national violence study here looked at and only found 7% of those identifying as queer. The Navajo Nation did their own study and they found 20%. The transgender did one and tried to isolate Indigenous communities, and they found 65%. So there's a huge variation. And all that says is that, well, we know there's something going on, and we need better ways of measuring this. In terms of stalking, we can take a look at those numbers here. I apologize if I'm going through quickly, but I don't want to focus too much on these numbers. Again, we can just see the prevalence and look at, again, who the perpetrators are. The perpetrators tend to be interracial, tend to be the perpetrators in terms of violence. Again, here, trans Indigenous women and men are 2.5 times more likely to be stalked. The Navajo Nation, the Dena Policy Institute study found that 24% of those identifying as Two-Spirit or Naglahe or LGBTQ were followed or chased by an intimate partner within the last 6 months. Another part of an intimate partner violence is using psychological aggression. You can just see these high numbers of how much is experienced by each one of these groups. Just again, these numbers are overwhelming at times. Just take a look at 1 in 2 females will experience some sort of expressive aggression in their lives. I mean, these are very, very sobering statistics. And again, if we take a look at what's happening within the Two-Spirit community, there's just variations, but what we're getting to see is between this transgender and the Net Policy Institute, there's some, it seems to be some sort of estimate that is in agreement about this population. And so what we find is there's a lot more work that needs to be done around our Indigenous LGBT communities. And so one of the other things that we're looking at as well is just looking at different types of intimate partner violence. And I think this can really help in terms of prevention. There's a typology of intimate partner violence, intimate terrorism. This is primarily male-centered, and these are the ones that are repeat offenders. There's situational couple violence, and oftentimes we see that happened a lot this past 6-7 months during the pandemic, where external stressors create maybe a once-in-a-lifetime violent situation in the home. And so those are situational, and there's the rest of these that I won't get into. But it's just important to understand the typology, in part because it offers more of a contextualized look at explaining intimate partner violence, and also helps to identify what sorts of perpetrators or types of violence are happening in the community, so you can better able to respond to those issues. And so here are just some other things with indicators of intimate partner violence. If things are happening to you by someone that is close to you, you most likely are experiencing intimate partner violence. So one of the big questions that sort of remains, and that a lot of, and that seems to be contemplated a lot in the research right now, especially within a lot of the work around the murder missing Indigenous women, is a lot of people are asking what explains this disproportionate violence against Native Indigenous women and just Indigenous people in general. And so we heard a lot about what happened. So we'll talk a little bit about settler colonialism. Both other panelists did an incredible job at showing the different mechanisms of how colonization operates. And so what I'm looking at is really like, what is the consequence of that? What happened as a result of that? What's happening, continuing to happen as a result of these colonial influences? And so it disrupts a relationship with the land. And what this ends up doing is it strains a relationship with the earth. It strains the ability to provide, to use the land to provide for necessities, to whatever that may be. It disrupts relationships with Indigenous values, a sense of loss of identity, a sense of one's identity being erased. It disrupts relations with others. Women, Two-Spirit, others are dehumanized. And what ends up happening as a result of all of this is that we end up healing individuals, but not Indigenous communities. And so that seems to be one of the bigger issues that comes as a result of this. And so part of this that we have to take a look at is this historical trauma that is coming, that we seem to all have, that Indigenous communities have with them. And this is sort of this cumulative, massive, chronic trauma that's imposed on communities across generations of their life course, and it leads to all sorts of different things that we can find. And so this is my attempt to sort of understand what's happening here. And so we have this entire cycle, right, of what's going on. This is settler colonialism. They take the land. They took the land for slavery. Right now, they're taking land for capital, for whatever they need, and then they make it their own. They say, now I'm white native. I mean, now I'm a native of America, whatever. And so what ends up happening is each and one of these moments is, yeah, lots of trauma happening. Well, these specific processes are still happening in our communities. So if we start a contact, this trauma just continues and aggregates. And each one of these sites could represent different things that are happening to our Indigenous communities. And these all contribute to this historical trauma, and then also the contemporary trauma that we are experiencing today. So this is a way that I've thought about it, and that we're thinking about it, because what we want to do at Restoring Ancestral Winds is we want to prioritize healing. But in order to prioritize the healing, we need to know what our communities are actually suffering from, and how, and all the different stressors that are creating problems in our communities. And so this intimate partner violence within Indigenous communities comes from multiple sources. There's direct violence, structural, and this is like what the state does, society does. It's this structural thing. So for example, like COVID, most tribes suffered unduly because of gaps in infrastructure. That's structural violence. But that also leads to historical trauma, because it reminds our communities of how we are at the lowest priority, even if we are on a priority list with our federal government, who is supposed to be exercising and abiding by this trust relationship. Or there's what's just happening in society with contemporary trauma. We have individuals who will just attack people of color, especially right now in this current election. And it's a highly racialized moment. And so there's a lot of trauma coming. And each of those act as stressors within Indigenous communities. What oftentimes happens is that a lot of the work and a lot of the programs in Indigenous communities that are offered through services tends to forget or prioritize at a lower way, or not even acknowledge this historical trauma piece, or even at times a structural violence piece in healing Indigenous communities, which is why I say that if we are not able to bring in our own Indigenous-centered programs, we oftentimes will just end up healing individuals, but not healing the community. And if we want to reclaim values and other things, we have to heal the community. And so forgive this example. It's just to show exactly all the, I mean, and I'm certain there's more, but this just shows what a structural violence could look like, and all the different ways that it impacts people, and the different webs that it creates. And then we have now we have this trauma and lateral violence piece that's coming from historical trauma that impacts our communities. And then we've got this piece. This is direct violence. This is intimate partner violence that's happening, and you can't sort all of those with. You have to have this entire set, and when we're talking about healing within our tribal communities, this is what we're talking about. Oftentimes other communities of color, or even non-native, non-people of communities of colors as well, don't need to address a number of these other things, but yet this is part of Indigenous healing, is to be able to address those things. Looking at all of these different things. So we talked about the perpetrators, violence of Indigenous women. There tend to be chronic, insidious, and it's overlapping. It's layered. And so the impact is, there's just general, there's health impacts, there's all sorts of impacts of intimate partner violence. And here's what's happening. We're already carrying our intergenerational trauma, and then we're now, as Indigenous people, living in this world that we're suffering from all sorts of things. So they put more upon us. We're already carrying what others are carrying, and then we carry more. I mean, and that's kind of what's happening. So we take a look at the impact of what's happening in Utah. Native Americans in Utah, 35% witnessed domestic violence as a child, 20% had poor mental health. And then we looked at 36, that's more than a third, 1 in 3, almost 1 in 3 children come from a family that experienced family conflict. In Navajo Nation, we just look at over the last several years, just how many cases and calls for domestic violence. Again, the Navajo Nation then points out, saying that there are severe problems related to how the Navajo Nation government itself can respond, and this is implicating the structural violent relationship that oftentimes tribes can be in with the federal government. And so we then take a bigger, broader view and take a look at these pathways, right? And so we see all of these things as a result of colonization. They lead to elevated risk factors, and these elevated risk factors leave them vulnerable to become victims of these things. And as we heard today, there's all sorts of issues with jurisdiction, data collection, media and attention. And so oftentimes these domestic violence and intimate partner violence could end up leading to one going murdered or missing. That statistic that we saw earlier, 55.4% of all homicides, Native women, of homicides of Native women are intimate partner violence related. And so what we look at then is like, what's the solution, right? Because one of the bigger questions that's being asked in the literature and the scholars and others is really like, why is this violence so disproportionate? What explains it, and what can we do about it? And so this was a study that was done in rural Mexico and looked at a completely traditional indigenous community and then another community in Mexico, and they basically created a natural experiment and showed that basically their findings are leaning towards saying preservation of cultural traditions actually is in some way correlated with low rates of IPV and severity as well. And so with that, we look at resilience and what's happening. And so there's a Navajo scholar who studied a lot about Navajo ceremonials. And one of the things that he writes is Mother Earth's placement of the 4 great branches of knowledge is not arbitrary. They all relate directly to a person's basic constitution of thought, body, mind, and home place. Hence, a person is not independent, but integrally connected to his environment. And what we find from what we see, the result of colonization is a disruption of these foundational principles of indigeneity, at least for Navajo. And we take a look here in terms of healing. Part of this healing process and programs ought to remind individuals that their self-worth is necessary. They need to have a sense of self-worth in order to heal. To remind them, and this is one of the more important parts, that culture is necessary to heal from historical trauma. Reminding them that historical trauma is, when you heal from historical trauma, you heal the community. And when you heal from intimate partner violence, you heal the community. And so when we take a look at what's going on, and so if we follow the lead of these ceremonials and indigenous knowledge, what we find, at least in Navajo, is that those 4 basic areas of domains of the thought, body, mind, and home place, basically, at least in Navajo, are these 4 elements that have to be in balance in some way in order for one to experience a sense of what Navajo call hojon. And what ends up happening, we found, is a process of colonization disrupted this traditional way, this indigenous way of knowing and being. And so what healing then is a reminder that we had the capacity to heal. And so, for example, this is actually from an actual ceremony. This is the prayer in a Navajo ceremonial. It says, according to the prayer, White Corn Boy, a god calls out the person and sings after him. When he hears nothing, the spiritual being then sets out to rescue him. And in that, this person then, the spiritual being then finds this man or this individual or woman confined in the spirit of this of an evil spirit. And so this god then goes and basically says, in Navajo, says, you're finished here, it's time to go home. And literally turns him sunward, or Shubik echo, meaning it's symbolic for restoring and reawakening the individual to their moral obligations and walking upright on this path that they call Hojonja, or blessing way. And this part in the prayer that they mention says, bringing the missing person home is a metaphor for bringing the person whose mind was absent from the home. And in this process, how this prayer continues is this deity, this female goddess in Navajo, Yellow Corn Girl, literally carries the mind of the family in her hand, behind the person who is healing. And when that person arrives home, that person in the prayer says, I have regained my mind, which essentially means I have regained my position in family. And so when we talk about healing, this is what we're talking about. This is what was lost within as a result of colonization. And so we take a look even more in this Navajo notion of like, in Navajo, there's a term that says kepitnastit, which essentially means that family is woven into most things. And so what we find then is that the community and the individual actually heal each other from this perspective. And that community is lost. Sovereignty is lost when intimate partner violence is addressed without indigenous relationality and without culture. We find that culture provides access to our cultural DNA. It establishes a relationship with the strength of our ancestors. Without culture, you end up healing the individual and not the community. And so what we find then in all of this work is that indigeneity is community, community is family, and indigeneity is family. Thank you. Any questions? I guess.
Thank you so much, Moroni. I've been monitoring questions from our attendees, and I do have one question I'll just get to, which is from a student researcher at the University of Kansas. And they're asking, they're studying IPV in rural communities, and the student believes that this relates very well to reservation communities. So they're wondering, what would you all believe to be the most important aspect to your services and to your ability to help victims? I'll just open it up to any of our panelists for a response.
Hi, so one of the things I would recommend is you always keep the humanity in with your services. And, you know, if somebody's coming through your door and they're looking for relief from the storm that they're walking through right now. So, you know, programs like ours need to be the calm in the storm. We need to be able to greet them with open arms and put them in the driver's seat by asking them, what is it that you need from us? And that's called survivor-centered services, right? And so a woman or a man who's being perpetrated on, they will know what they need to survive. It may be something as simple as knowing that they have a door to walk through. It could be something as simple as they just need to come and talk to somebody that's not, you know, intimately connected to the family or to the part of the community that they circle in. And or it could be something as, you know, higher you know, responses as a restraining order or medical services that they may need. And so it's important not to inundate people walking through our doors with thick, like, intake papers right away. You know, have them come in, have them catch their breath, you know, ask them, you know, would you like some water? Would you like some coffee? Have you eaten? It's like a relative coming over to your house, right? You know, it's like, you know, come in, you know, and then let's talk. So keeping the humanity in is very key in providing that safe space for folks.
I agree with the chairwoman that and what I called it relationality, but this humanity of just basically recognizing this kinship responsibility we have with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I say this and oftentimes people will hear it, but what I'm finding is that even the individual may not feel the kinship at first, but eventually that kinship that you practice will be medicine to them regardless of whether they feel it or not. They will eventually feel the strength and the love that's in those kinship terms. And so and that's part of relationality, and that's what I think one of the things that I really believe. And that part of that kinship recognition also recognizes implicitly this historical trauma that we've all been through, and says, hey, I've been through it, you can get through it too. And so I think, at least for us, that's what we're at least our organization is really premised on making sure that we practice kinship and relationality.
I would add too that one of the things, I worked in a shelter and, you know, all this stuff. So that didn't actually foster this kind of treatment. And what I saw work was the same thing that I was given by elders and family, which is a lack of judgment, a treatment that what you're experiencing when you're coming in with traumatic experience. If you've dealt with domestic violence, it's embarrassing, it's humiliating. It's humiliating to go through it. It hurts the spirit of you, and it's not a measure of you at the same time. And that's not just even the idea, we know this, right? We know that it's not we're not at fault for what a perpetrator does. That's, of course, right? But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about life is life. Life is complicated. And my elders have always addressed any kind of concerns I had without judgment. I mean, there might be silence sometimes, a little judginess in there, but the silence and the treatment is that you're a whole human being, and maybe you need some help right now. There's nothing wrong with needing a little help, or even a lot of help. And so that lack of judgment is part of that humanity that I think Native traditions, people understood, people gave to each other. So that's what I would add.
I think what the three of you today have really connected about this issue, about this problem of violence that exists in our communities, is sort of like those ideas of epidemiology, right? Like, how do we find out? The epidemiologist looks for the disease, or in this case, the dis-ease, right? Like, we see it happening, but what is making it so that people become susceptible to it? Or what moves them through that process so they don't get it, or that it stops? So you're kind of looking at the cause of the cause of the cause. And all three of your lessons and words today really go down to that colonization as the insidious underlying formation of how we've experienced violence in our Native communities, in Indigenous communities globally, right? And that, but that what has helped for the survival and for the healing and for the momentum forward is connecting to that which the colonizer didn't want us to have, which is that connection to culture, to tradition, to language, to how we have our health care, to what it is we can eat, to how we celebrate life and death. And that's what I'm really thankful for, all of your presentations of really coming down to that crux of, here's the shared history, but we never lost sight of who we are and what we are, regardless of those external forces. But now we have this insidious, long-standing tradition of violence that we, and the three of you are representing, where communities are healing and correcting that course. Let me see if there are other, we have one other question that has come up, and I know we have about 2 or 3 minutes left. Oh,
Dr. Ed, can I just add something before we
yes,
move to
please,
the next question?
of course.
Well, one of the things we also have to really be mindful of is that our tribal values, customs, and traditions laid a foundation of accountability to each other. So there were harsh consequences to this type of behavior. And so, you know, I don't want people to walk away from this webinar with the impression excusing this type of violence that is by choice, practiced by choice, and power and control. You know, it's because you don't see these perpetrators or these abusers going to work and beating up their bosses and their coworkers, right? They choose to practice this type of violence in the home. And I know these belief systems come through colonialism and practiced through laws and, you know, by states and the federal government over time across, you know, all, you know, ethnic groups. But, you know, the main thing we really have to strive for is accountability. And then how do we hold our abusers and our perpetrators accountable? And then how do we help them heal? Because they're not leaving our communities. They are our fathers, our brothers, our mothers, our sisters, and they're not going anywhere, right? And so creating that safe space. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes. How do we continue this when the forces in the system outside of our communities? I mean, you all made it very clear that Native people, bodies, land, resources are just resources. I mean, why is the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Bureau of Indian of Education underneath the U.S. Department of Interior, right? We are things that are looked after, right, by the federal government. With that, I'd like to ask one more question and then turn our time over to any last comments from our panel, and then final words from our host today, Annie. So one last question, and how has the recent ideology of neoliberalism affected Indigenous individuals suffering from IPV? It's a big question.
I think I can start with that. I think neoliberalism at its core is really just a repackaged notion of an entire social system that is premised on capitalism. And capitalism thrives when there are very clear gender roles. Capitalism thrives on the values of patriarchy. Capitalism thrives on the ability to debase, to dehumanize. Capitalism thrives on limited regulation of different things. Capitalism, I mean, all sorts of things. And so when we think about that, that is neoliberalism. It structures how Indigenous communities are supposed to respond. And even to the extent now where we'll have programs or programs or prevention programs that are for Indigenous communities that are basically just Western neoliberal critiques with Indigenous names on them. That's another way that it impacts, is because then an Indigenous victim sees that and says, oh, it's Indigenous centered, and turns out it just makes them a better employee for a corporation. Because in the end, what neoliberalism does, it abides by a logic that says, I have to get material possessions and give my all to work in order to be happy. That is not an ideology of indigeneity.
No, and you see that exemplified in our clinics, our Indian health clinics, and our hospitals, and it's disgusting, you know, because our people didn't advocate for those resources for our people just to be leaving from one form of abuse to another, and that's why I think we need more programs, more grassroots programs. Designed for and by Native people in Indian country.
I'd agree with all of that. I mean, neoliberalism, it's a tough question, so thanks for taking it first. But these connections between capitalism and individualism, and an individual that is competitive with others to the point where the other loses, right? That's capitalism. Like, I win, you lose. That's That's market capitalism. That's what runs Wall Street. And that kills off humanity. It kills off you. In order to do that and perform like that, you have to give up your own humanity. And one of the things I hear both of you talking about reminds me that the healing has to do with having dignity brought back to the person, right? Both to the victim and to the perpetrator. You know, the perpetrators, they don't have a lot of dignity. They might have a lot of ego, but there's not dignity in what they're doing. And so it's one of the things I love about our communities is we might ice people out. We might get a little on the quiet side. We might do a lot of things, but we know that they're still part of the family, that we love them. We treat them with love, even if it's tough love. And it's bringing back, and it makes me think of your early presentations, it's a way to bring people back into being people, being whole, being well. How do you do that? That happens through the traditional ways where that's a given, where it's a given that you are accountable. You're taught as I was taught as a little kid, like, you know, you have to be accountable for your actions. And you can bump around and be not great at it, right? But when you really fail yourself and you fail other people because you're not being accountable to that kind of ethic of love, right? That matters. And how you treat people from that place matters. And you're talking about it as a way to bring that back. And one of the things with, I'm a member of the Fresno American Indian Health project here. And it's really interesting to watch and work and watch policies and push towards tradition, because we just had a whole bunch of evacuations with fires, and it's like, oh, well, we're putting people up in hotels and we're taking care of people. You see the same thing with all of our young people timing out of help. That's something with our service to our communities. Your family doesn't time out. You don't say, I have 2 weeks and then you're on your own feet, right? So I think we need to transition some of our healthcare and service care and teaching and mentoring and all of that to where we bring those traditions in, where no, you don't get support for 2 weeks, and well, too bad if your house is too toxic to move back into because it's full of smoke, right? That's what we just had happen here. So again, I really respect and appreciate the work that you're both doing, and what I learned from you today. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, I want to also thank all of you today for your time, and thank you for what you're doing in educating both our Native and our non-Native community members. And this has been an honor to meet you. And I'd like to turn the time over now to Annie for final thoughts.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to thank Dena, Ned for a wonderful facilitation. I want to thank Moroni Benally, Leece Oliver, Wendy Slater for your generosity of your time, your commitments to community, and your wonderful work and leadership, and for enlightening many of us about the important work that you're all doing. So I want to thank you all. In the chat, I did share some links for our next event. This event was hosted by the University of Utah's Gender-Based Violence Consortium, and we do have an event that's coming up that will focus on gender addiction and violence. And that you'll hear from folks such as Drs. Yoshimi Anzai, Kathleen Franchek-Roa, Leslie Halpern, as well as Marcella Schmid. And so a really nice lineup there too. So please stay connected. I put our email in here, gbvc.utah.edu. If you want to be added to our listserv, that's a way you can stay connected, and we'll keep you up to date. As well as please do connect with these wonderful folks who are doing important work. I did share some links to them as well as to their community organizations. And so thank you everyone for hanging on. The video will be available post-event, and it's been streaming on Facebook. And so thank you everyone. Please stay well, stay safe, and take care.
Thank you, Annie. Be safe, be well. Thank you, everyone. Be safe, be well.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.